In my travels as an explorer and a biologist, I've been inspired by many people who are working tirelessly to better our world. In this series, I'm seeing how their vision is helping drive change and protect the planet, and what each of us can do to make a real difference. Joyce Poole is one of the most iconic and influential scientists of a generation. Her work on elephant communication revolutionized our understanding of the social lives of these hugely intelligent animals. Her testimony helped bring about the global ivory ban, and her advocacy has seen the implementation of more humane elephant management practices right across Africa. Joyce is a giant in her field, a supremely talented biologist, and a matriarch of elephant conservation. Joyce Poole, welcome to ChangeMakers.
Thank you.
You spent your first few years living in Connecticut before your parents upped sticks and moved to Malawi and then Kenya, which must have been a major upheaval for you as a child. Or did you just take it in your stride because you were only 6 years old?
No, I didn't. I think surprisingly, I'm one of these people who finds it very hard to move places. So I do remember as a 6-year-old having to be carried into class crying for, I think it was about a week.
Living in East Africa, you were surrounded by just extraordinary nature, which must have had an impact on you. But can you remember specific moments when you realized that you wanted to spend your life being an animal behaviorist, studying nature for a living?
Well, you know, I met my first elephant when I was 6. We actually took a family safari, driving our car all the way from Malawi to East Africa and to Amboseli. And there was charged by an elephant and actually hid under the seat of the car.
Wow.
In the old Land Rovers, you know, that had bench seats in the back.
Yeah,
and had that, you know, rush of adrenaline. And I still remember it so clearly now. But then when I was 11, I had the chance to listen to Jane Goodall give a talk at the National Museums of Kenya. And I told my mother then that that's what I wanted to do when I grew up. So it does have, my career has roots going back a very long time.
Your work on elephant must, which you published in the world's most prestigious scientific journal, Nature, at the tender age of 25, seems to have been a real launchpad for your career. Can you explain to us what must is and why it's important to elephants?
Well, must is a period of heightened sexual and aggressive activity. And males come into must at about 30 years of age. That sounds old, but actually it's young for an elephant. Certainly a male elephant who is only partially grown. They continue to grow until they're about 40 years old, and they continue to put on weight even beyond that. And must had been known about for, centuries, perhaps even longer in Asian elephants, because Asian elephants had been captured and trained. And of course, when a male comes into must, he's very aggressive, very high testosterone levels. So normally dominance rank is based on body size, which is correlated with age. But when a male comes into must, he will rank above males who are older than he is. One of the main indicators of must is the temporal gland secretion, which only occurs in males when they're in must. So I started noticing males of a certain age coming into, with the secretion, but they were also dribbling urine. So everywhere they went, they left a trail of urine. Then I came across a paper on Asian elephants that talked about these different characteristics, and I hadn't realized that they also dribble urine. So it was like that aha moment, and realized that I had discovered that African elephants come into must also. And so that then led to many years of study.
Interesting. As you say, the condition of must makes them quite aggressive. Can you describe some of the ways and means you have sought to try and mitigate that conflict and enable people to live in relative harmony with elephants.
It's not really the musk males that are the problem, because musk males are interested in females. You know, they're less interested in eating and getting into conflict with people than non-musk males are.
For people living in and around elephants are essentially a nightmare to live next to because they have enormous appetites and they can be quite aggressive. Is that conflict one of the biggest threats that elephants are facing at the moment?
Absolutely. It is, you know, human-elephant conflict is a huge threat to the survival of elephants because, as you know, there are more and more people and people require more and more space. So elephants are being squeezed into, smaller spaces, smaller habitat. People are planting right up against the boundaries of national parks and tempting males into, you know, their fields of tomatoes or onions or whatever. And young males in particular have so much growing to do. And we have found that males who raid crops grow faster, grow bigger. So there is a real incentive, unfortunately, for elephants to raid crops.
I personally was incredibly lucky to visit Amboseli National Park in 2001 and stay at Cynthia Moss's elephant camp. Unfortunately, didn't overlap with you being there, but I remember one of the other people at the camp telling me this extraordinary story of yours when you encountered a female elephant with a calf that was very close to death and you came to its aid. Can you tell us that story now?
Actually, the elephant was Tony, and she had given birth to a stillborn baby.
Right.
So it had already died.
Oh,
and when I drove back into camp after being out in the field in the morning, I found her standing there. She had been standing out there all morning because someone else had seen her earlier. And I realized that, you know, she had no water. And I think I had waited until the next day and she was still standing with her dead infant, chasing off jackals and vultures and trying to lift the baby. At least the first day she was trying to lift the infant. So I just decided that I should take her some water. I mean, normally as scientists, we're not supposed to interfere. But I did take her. I went out with a jerry can full of water in a basin. And when I first drove toward her, she charged the car, even though she was very used to us. But when she heard me pouring the water, she came right over to the car. And I was standing outside the car, half outside the car, pouring the water. And she drank with her tusk, you know, a centimeter from my head. Wow. And after she finished all the water, she reached in and just touched me on my chest and then just stood by the car. So, you know, I really felt at that moment that was that she understood that I was helping her, and that was a gesture of gratitude.
It's an extraordinary story, Joyce. For me, it's one of the most unbelievable examples of interspecies empathy. And I know you've spent a lot of your career understanding the behaviour and the signs that elephants give for their behaviour. How well do you think that elephants can interpret the intentions of people that they're coming across?
I think they can. I mean, obviously it depends how much experience they have. I know from like captive elephants, they've shown that they understand pointing. And they also understand when other elephants point or use their trunks in a certain direction. When one elephant does a periscope trunk that we normally think of as sniffing, then other elephants will then point their trunks in the same direction. So they're taking that, it's not only just picking up the scent, but they're seeing other elephants doing this and taking that as a signal that they should pay attention in a particular direction.
The African elephant population today is about a third of what it was 40 years ago, mainly as a result of poaching for ivory. We know that the trauma caused by poaching can make elephants behave in a more aggressive way. Can you describe what other ways the fabric of elephant societies are affected by trauma?
Well, I mean, first of all, thinking back to my work in the late 80s, during the height of one of the waves of poaching, what happens is that, populations lose most of their males. So you end up with a very skewed sex ratio. And then once the males, because they're bigger, they have much bigger tusks, once the males have been taken out, then poachers focus on the adult females and often the matriarchs. So you end up with very fragmented families or even families that are composed completely of orphans, just orphan groups running around. That was the most tragic thing, and they're so frightened.
Your research helped contribute to the implementation of the international ivory ban in 1989. And since that time, there have been 2 one-off sales of ivory from Southern Africa out to Asia, to Japan and China, both of which seem to have caused a spike in poaching. How do you feel now, so many years after that ban was in place, the fact that there are still countries, in Southern Africa in particular, the SADC nations, that are trying to sell their ivory abroad and say that it's none of anybody else's business what they do with their elephants, in inverted commas?
Yeah, well, of course I get very annoyed about it, what can I say? I mean, these are sovereign countries. They can make their arguments, and hopefully we can try to convince them that this is not the way to go. What makes me even more angry is actually the idea that if you think you have too many elephants, that another way of dealing with them is to capture baby elephants and ship them off to zoos. That is just, both of these things to me is just a crime. I mean, with the ivory, they will say, well, they have huge stockpiles that they want to sell. And I, of course I can understand that. People think ivory is beautiful. People want to buy ivory. They feel, why should we just let it sit in a warehouse and rot? But at the same time, it does stimulate a demand for ivory. As long as we say it's okay to buy ivory, then people are gonna buy ivory and elephants are going to die.
That's a pretty simple formula.
Yeah, we just have to keep banging on about it.
Kenya has taken part in some massive symbolic gestures, of course. They've had 4 major ivory burns, and they have arrested some really serious international smugglers. But those guys seem to be evading justice every time their cases go to court. What's happening there?
I'm not sure I can answer that. I think it depends on, who their perhaps political masters are. They may have protection in high places. So I think, this is so difficult because on the one hand, there are poachers who are very poor people who are just trying to survive. And then there are the kingpins. So we're talking about very different individuals there. And I think that the people who are caught, the poor people who are actually doing the poaching may often be caught and put away, but it's the dealers that have more clout, have more protection, I should say.
Poaching, thankfully, has declined in East Africa in particular, but across the continent since 2011. What do you see as the major threats to elephant populations going forward?
Human populations are increasing. Big, wide landscapes that elephants need are disappearing fast. Fences are going up. Settlements are going in. And it is happening now. A huge tract of land was sold for growing the avocados that people want on their plates every lunchtime. And it's right smack in a corridor, an important area for elephants to move from Amboseli to the next sort of safe haven.
Fascinating. People thinking they're being sustainable by cutting meat out of their diet and eating avocados instead are actually
No,
precipitating an extinction crisis.
it's so tricky. And the same, with the roses that everyone buys to give to their sweethearts. Those roses are grown, almost all of them are grown in Kenya. And, and many of them are grown from water that is piped from the Amboseli ecosystem. Whole swamps have dried up to feed those rose farms. So, it's very hard for us going about our daily lives to realize the kind of impact that we're having around the globe.
Huge portion of your research has been on elephant communication, which culminated in 2021 with the publication of the elephant ethogram. Can you explain what the ethogram is?
The ethogram is a library of elephant behavior. It happens to be a library that's online, so it's accessible to everyone. It describes over 400 behaviors with currently 2,400 videos, plus audio, written descriptions, and each video has a very detailed caption. So each video is like a little bit of science telling.
With basically the key to elephant behavior described therein.
Yeah. I mean, I must have been mad, I think. Seriously. I mean, when I think to all the work that went into it. But, we had built, my husband and I, Petter Granli, but we had built two online databases before, one for vocalizations and the other for their postures and gestures. But neither of those had video. And we really felt that for people to understand the different behaviors of elephants, we really needed to show it with video because so much is about the movement, the way the ear moves and so on. So this has been built up with moving circles. So when the behavior occurs, the body part that's involved is circled. And
I can't wait to access it and have a look myself. Scientists are often accused of being dispassionate observers of their study species, but you cannot be accused of being remotely dispassionate. No. What can we learn from your lifetime of research with elephants about how we improve our relationship with elephants at a landscape scale?
Well, I think that really understanding elephants and understanding how their families work and how the clans work. I think the more we can understand about them and their needs, the more we can at least have the capacity to solve some of the problems that we collectively face. That doesn't mean that we will. We're a pretty selfish species, and we have so many needs ourselves. So but that's what gets me out of bed in the morning, and that was what drove me to do the ethogram. I just hope that people will be just impressed by how flexible, how creative, how adaptable elephants are, and that if we can only stretch ourselves a little bit to try and meet their needs, that this world isn't just for us. It's not a planet just for the human species, and that for other species to survive, we need to make space.
We do indeed. Well, Joyce Poole, thank you for coming on to ChangeMakers. It's an absolute pleasure and a privilege to finally meet you. And thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you so much, Niall.
It's been lovely speaking to you.